All right, we have a very special guest on the show today. She is a small business expert, a business in general expert, a book writer. She's been on a whole host of shows, sharing her expertise. Carol Roth, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I am doing well, and I'm so excited that it's a very special episode because it reminds me I grew up in the 80s of those very special episodes of, like when Nancy Reagan would show up and say, don't do drugs on like some, different strokes or facts of life. So I'm excited for a very special episode of your show.
That's right. That's right. I grew up in the 90s. So in the early 90s, they still had a little bit of the very special episode.
Yeah, a couple. And then you got the whole like your brain's on drugs thing. And it was like they had kind of devolved by the 90s a little bit. But
right. Yeah. So first, we have so many things to discuss, so many questions that I have for you. But just off the top, obviously, because, it just happened and, everyone is talking about the death of Queen Elizabeth in the United Kingdom. And one of the things, obviously, I have a lot of respect for the history and the pageantry and all of that. But when I think about the United Kingdom, I think about it in relation to their relationship with us in the United States. So talk a little bit from a economic perspective and even just on a global scale. Talk a little bit about the importance of the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom.
Yes, well, I also appreciate that Queen Elizabeth was put into a job that she didn't necessarily want and wasn't necessarily prepared for at a young age, and did it with grace and professionalism and dedication. But also as an American, our founding fathers fought a war, so I didn't really have to care about the monarchy. And as an individualist and a free market person, I kind of find the whole thing a little bit distasteful. But given the fact that these days we sort of live under the illusion of freedom. And anyway, I'm not sure that it's that far away from where we are. But I think that that's kind of the cautionary tale, while the UK and, other parts of Europe have become, our allies over time economically. I'm not sure that that's, it is a good thing because they've had a bad influence on us. There are lots of really great things that we want to import from the UK and Europe. UK has great humor. Italy has got great wine. France has great cheese and fashion, but their economic policy is terrible. And they have taken nations that were thriving and turned them into these socialist beasts with less economic freedom, more central planning control, and sort of everything that the United States doesn't stand for. And I think because, our leaders have been hanging around with too many of them, they've gotten all of these bad ideas and they've sort of brought them over here. And we don't want them. We shouldn't want them because they're the opposite of what has made us successful in the past and what could potentially make us successful in the future if we were to continue down that. But it's just, all of this crazy collusion. Janet Yellen, our Treasury Secretary, running to Europe and going, let's put a minimum tax on corporations, and all of this printing of money from central banks and being enablers of each other. Well, if you do it, we'll do it, and then none of us have to worry about it. They just, I don't know, economically, I feel like, when you're a kid and you've got that friend who kind of seems cool, but is a bad influence, and your parents are like, maybe you shouldn't be hanging out with them. I kind of feel like that's the case. Unfortunately for the US, there aren't really any great friends. So we just have to be loners, which again, we're individual rights people. We should be able to be loners.
So you bring up so many good points that I want to kind of delve into in that. We're in this weird place, I think, where we're kind of in this global economy, whether we want to be or not. And there's been some benefits and some drawbacks for us as Americans. How do we navigate that? How do we make sure that because we're not going to be able to go back to a full protectionist world, I don't think. I think the horse is kind of out of the barn for that. So how do we how do we navigate this global environment while also making sure that our people are protected?
So yeah, we really have to get our house in order. We spend a lot of time, running around going, oh, well, we need to give you money for this, and you guys aren't good at this, and you need to clean up this. But really, our own problems start at home. The call is coming from inside the house. It's that take care of your foundation before you can do anything else. And we have so many of the tools and so many of the resources to put ourselves in a stronger financial position to restore economic freedom. But we don't really have the will as a country to do that, because the country is really divided in two. You've got the people who are like, yes, daddy, I love you, government daddy, please take care of me, give me things, and whatever that they want. They really think it's like their sugar daddy, right, is the government. And they need that like they can't think about, like, I love when people are like, and how would this happen without the government? And like, well, we would just do it like we do everything else. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, right? There, you could privatize pretty much anything that the government does. And so we have too many people who, need that level of control. They actually want to be a socialist country. I had done sort of a tongue-in-cheek op-ed probably about a year ago that said that the solution to our problems was not only a national divorce, but like a spouse swap with Canada, where Canada is already this socialist country, right? They've got like the healthcare system in place, and they've got, the control and the government that shuts down truckers' bank accounts, all the things that they love about government control. And then you've got these kind of freedom-loving Canadians that are like, ugh, I got to get out of here. We could just do a swap, right? We could just send everybody who likes socialism and put them like in Team Canada, and we could take the freedom-loving people. And I actually think that would be sort of an elegant way to revitalize North America, because, I don't mind being neighbors with these folks as long as I don't have to capitulate to what it is they want to do. But every one of their ideas is just a really bad idea that maybe sounds good in theory, but produces ridiculous outcomes. And if they didn't have the thought level of a third grader, they'd be able to figure that out.
We're talking with Carol Roth. She's author of the book, The War on Small Business. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But one of the things that I love about, like, I've heard your appearances on other shows on this network, and I've seen you on television programs and things like that. One of the things I love about what you do is you take these complex, highfalutin concepts and you distill it down on an every man, every woman level, where the average person can understand. So one of the things that I'm concerned about, obviously the economy is bad, and it's still bad. I mean, people are trying to act like, oh, it's recovering. Gas is only $5 a gallon and not $8 anymore, right? Like, it's like, it's still pretty bad out there. And I'm concerned that things are going to get worse. I've been hearing about the possibility of food shortages. I've been hearing that, prices are going to skyrocket again within the next month or so. What do you see coming up economically in the country?
So going back to what you were explaining, I watched a lot of Sesame Street as a child. So I'm kind of going back to my Sesame Street roots in terms of the explainers on all of these things. When you look at something like the inflation number, the headline number, first of all, it's not a true inflation number. They have messed with it several times to make it seem better. One, so that you don't have a heart attack when you see the actual inflation number, but also because a lot of the benefits like Social Security have these cost of living adjustments that are tied to an aspect of the like CPI inflation number. So if they had the real number showing up, they'd owe everybody a lot more money. So, but you're still seeing a number that's out there. And what you're seeing is the rate of inflation on a period over period basis. So kind of the big numbers, we saw kind of that peak at 9 point something percent, and then we saw it come down to 8 point something percent. That's from a year over year basis. And what you have to understand about that is that when numbers are that high, the next year, they're now comparing at the higher level. So even if they continue to go up in real dollars terms, on a percentage basis, it may look like a lot less because the bottom has gotten so big. The number that you're comparing against has gotten so big. So, it doesn't look like, oh, it looks like inflation is really slowing down. But as you said, it still could be 5% or 6% over the 9% this year, over the 5% last year. I mean, these are real ongoing costs that are baked in. So
Right.
I think that there is a chance, certainly we've been hearing out of Russia. They are playing, I hate to even call it like 3D chess because it's like super obvious, but they're kind of playing maybe we won't sell anybody any oil and gas just to mess with you kind of thing. And depending on what happens with China's demand, there could be a scenario where you start getting energy costs to go up again. And that's really been flowing through, no pun intended, the rest of the economy. And also, causing issues like some of these food shortages. There are derivative products that are used in terms of drying grains, for example. There's also been a fertilizer shortage. So there are all these things that are sort of interconnected together. I think the reality is, there's been this big debate over whether or not the first half of the year was a recession or not. Technically, assuming the third read of the GDP stays negative, it was. It's possible the third quarter could eke out a slightly positive number, and then we could end up going back into something that looks like a recession again. But I don't think that the fallout in the economy, because the labor market has been tight, there's been a switch on the consumer side from goods to services. There are a lot of things that are playing out that take a little time to play out. I don't think we've seen the depth of that type of pain. So I do think we will continue to have elevated prices, and then we will have an economy that's either stagnant, which would be called stagflation, that the high inflation in a stagnating economy, or further contraction, which, would be a recession. But because they messed everything up so much during COVID, there isn't sort of a good benchmark, and it's going to look different than the times before, especially because we don't have the same labor force participation. We have the supply demand mismatch in terms of labor. And so, those are things that people on the other side are going to point to and go, oh, no, the economy's not that bad, when you may be losing your job, not you personally, but you in the general. So somebody out there may be losing their job. Not to scare you, not to give you any sort of heartburn over this. But people could be losing their jobs. Things remain very expensive. Businesses, just kind of throw in the towel and say enough's enough. So I just feel like we haven't seen sort of the depths of that pain yet. And that's probably coming, whether it's the end of the year or, early next year, kind of depending on what happens this winter with the weather and how cold it is and the energy situation.
I also think too, the strategies from the Fed the Federal Reserve, it plays a role as well. And this is kind of my perspective, and I would love to get your take on it. For me, and for people who are listening who don't know, basically when you have inflation, it's really, to kind of simplify, it's too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. You have too much money in the system, and that causes inflation. Now, we've had multi-trillion-dollar bills, obviously through COVID, and then stupidly outside of COVID, they've continued to pass these big bills, printing this money, and it creates this inflationary situation. And usually the Federal Reserve, when you have an inflation problem, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates in order to suck some of that money back out to try to stabilize prices. Now, my concern from the beginning is that they were kind of, for lack of a better term, pussyfooting around with it instead of just ripping the Band-Aid off and just kind of dripping. And I think by doing that, all they did was just extend the pain because now they've gone to, oh, you know what? That didn't work. So now we have to raise interest rates much higher over and over and over again. And I think as a result, in my opinion, we're barreling towards long-term recessionary problems. So your thoughts on the strategy that the Federal Reserve has used to try to deal with inflation?
Okay, so anybody who follows me knows that I have no love for the Fed. We are not even frenemies. We're probably full on enemies. I don't like them. I think that they're, a bunch of, things that I can't say on this. But so they've just been wrong about everything, and they have artificially been suppressing the market, suppressing interest rates, printing money from nowhere, throwing it on their balance sheet, which creates inflation. And for the people who say, oh, but the inflation rate didn't go up. Yeah, it went up in terms of assets that inflated the stock market and inflated housing prices. It started out as asset inflation because that's who got their hands on that money, not the every person. It wasn't until the every person got it that we saw the, kind of the broader impacts of that. So they have been at this since the Great Recession and financial crisis, and in this quote unquote emergency mode, for longer than they've not been in the emergency mode. And they've had many opportunities to normalize the interest rates, which they did not take advantage of and should have. And they should have done it when all of us very clearly could see that the policies that not only they, but the administration, and particularly the Biden administration with that American Rescue Plan in 2021, we just knew that was like, okay, this is going to be ugly. They really should have started raising interest rates then. And it wasn't until after we had historic interest rates, we had 40-year highs in January of 2022, which, by the way, was before the whole Putin, Ukraine thing even started. We were at a 40-year high. They were still buying securities and messing around and not changing their policy. So they were very well behind the curve. And because they were so behind the curve, because really their secret mandate is to prop up government spending and Wall Street, not to actually stabilize prices and AKA inflation, and make sure we have maximum employment, like they like to say. They were sort of panicking by the time that all of this came around, and so then they were sort of rushing to catch up. But the miscalculation that we have at this point, and I am glad that they got us back to what they consider sort of a long-term neutral interest rate or a little bit above it. I think that's appropriate. But the problem is that they don't have the right tools to be able to do this. The reason we are having this crazy inflation outside of their policy and the overall policy decisions, but the situation we have now is we have a supply and demand imbalance where we are undersupplied. We are undersupplied in labor. We are undersupplied in housing. We are undersupplied in energy. We are undersupplied in commodities. We're undersupplied in food. It's a supply issue. What the Fed does, as you eloquently explained, is they try to curtail demand. They try to make it so that you as a consumer don't want to spend as much money, or that the business doesn't make the investment. That's their hammer hitting the nails, trying to hit demand. So when you have a supply issue and they're trying to hit demand, the only way that gap is closing, to your point, is by creating a scenario where businesses are shutting down and consumers aren't spending, which means, eventually you do end up having those recessionary conditions, because that's the math of, what accounts for the increase in the GDP. So that's my concern. I think that some of what they've done, whatever is fine, but they really should be taking a pause, because they don't have the tools. It's not like they can print oil or print food or whatnot. They can only print dollars. And there's some natural issues that are already slowing demand. The inflation itself is naturally withholding the consumer's purchasing power. We have, this whole implosion in China that is happening, which, between their COVID lockdowns, their energy issues, their real estate collapsing, like they have a mess on their hands, which in itself will also slow demand on a global scale. And then we obviously know that Europe's, a mess from a global standpoint. So there are a lot of drivers that are sort of naturally giving the Fed help on the demand side. And so I think the realistic concern is that they're in a panic mode. They're going to overshoot. And yeah, we're just going to end up, with both sides of their bad policy on the way up and bad policy on the way down. But guess who loves that? Their cronies love that. They love the boom and the bust cycles because they've got lots of money that can just sit on the sidelines. And then when everything blows up and is cheap and we're all sad and, have sold out of the markets and whatnot, then they can swoop in and buy everything at cheap prices so the Fed can go inflate the bubble again.
So yeah, they just get to ride the wave, and regardless, they always win no matter what. So we have a few minutes left, and I want to hit on a couple of more topics. So you brought up China. I personally am someone who believes a decoupling is necessary. Whatever we can make here, we should make here. And if we can't make it here, we need to make it with, I don't know, people who are actually our allies for real and not people who are trying to displace us.
Wait, what do you say? You don't want to do business with communists? That's shocking.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that might be an issue? People who don't value property rights or individual rights or any human rights. Maybe we shouldn't make them super successfal.
Yeah,
Interesting theory. Interesting theory.
Probably not the best idea. So you said that. Tell us your thoughts on decoupling from China.
So I have a whole chapter in the War on Small Business devoted to China because it's one of those things where I've really sort of changed my mind on it, right? If you kind of go into free marketeering and you're like, oh, it's a great idea. We want to have global trade and we want to have, the lowest cost of products. But the part that nobody told me until, I really kind of thought about it was like, oh, wait, but they don't believe in property rights. And so if you're going to have a free market, you need a free market trading partner or this isn't going to work out. You need those guardrails. And so, yeah, I think that China, again, they advertise it. It's the Chinese Communist Party that is running the country. And as much as they have imported and benefited some aspects of capitalism, at the end of the day, they are communists and that's how they are going to proceed. And we have seen, sort of the outgrowth of that. And they should be treated as who they tell us they are. And that is not a trustworthy partner. I know that, a lot of the greedy politicians and the big businesses are salivating because there's so many people in that country. But at the end of the day, it just isn't going to work out. It's going to create more problems than the benefits. It's that sort of temptation that seems like a good idea, kind of like a hot, crazy girl, it seems like a good idea, but that's going to end badly. So I feel like it's the same thing. And we have to be able to look at anything that we're getting from them and find many additional sources. To the extent we can do it here in the United States, great. But again, we've got all of these sort of, anti-free market policies that make it very difficult and expensive to do so. So that's really something that's a huge consideration for the future. And, when we think about this, green energy push, there's a lot of the componentry, whether it is the rare earth minerals or the fabrication, that really we're going to, again, depend on China. It's, again, just not learning from the mistakes over the past, 4 decades or whatever it's been. It's just kind of horrifying to watch the same march happen at a time when, who knows? They could end up, based on all of their problems, looking for a way to create cover for that, and creating a war, invading Taiwan, doing whatever it is, and creating all sorts of problems. And we're just highly, highly exposed to them as a country, in all different sorts of ways. And I don't think that they're going to be a long-term friend of ours.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
So when we talk a lot about these issues, it can seem, I think, sometimes like it's hard, I think, for some people to kind of connect the dots to how it impacts their life right now. I am someone I'm from the inner city. I grew up poor, and the people that I knew for the most part growing up were either, poor Black folks or poor and working class Black and white folks. That's basically the neighborhood I grew up in. And I see those people, no matter who's in office, year after year after year, economic outcomes have a hard time. They either don't improve or there's no staying power.
Yeah.
Or either for poor and working class Black people and poor and working class white people. So we're going to put a magic wand right now and we're going to deem you president. What, from an economic perspective, what needs to be done specifically to positively impact the lives of people like the people I grew up with?
Yeah. So, I'm from Chicago as well. My dad grew up on the west side of Chicago. This is a passion area for me. And I'm also someone who focuses on wealth creation. I firmly believe that the pie is growing if we have the right tools. And that means that everybody can get more of the pie and we can all be pigs and eat the pie together. So that's kind of my focus. Creating wealth means that you have to own things. You have to own assets that are going to at least stay the same in value, but hopefully appreciate in value over time. And unfortunately, what the governments in general, but especially, progressive, quote unquote, and democratic policies have done is they've asked these lower income folks to make a trade-off and just basically say, we're going to take care of you, but you don't have the opportunity to actually own or build any wealth on that. So you're just going to be treading water. You're just going to be getting by. And so I would really be focused on how we can take back, call back, the spending at the federal level, return more power to the states and return more power to the individuals. That money should be in the hands of individuals. If you're working, why is it that you're getting some sort of phony promise for Social Security instead of being able to take that money and invest it in a house or invest it in precious metals or the stock market or whatever it is? It's because the government doesn't want you to create wealth. They want to be the middleman and they want to have the power to dole this all out. So I would return that and I would have a message of wealth creation to every individual. This is the reason why people still want to come here from, every corner. Can you have a corner of a globe when it's round? Probably not, but let's just pretend you can. But every part of the world, do they want to come here to participate in that American dream? But the government has made, every aspect of that more difficult and more costly with regulation and taxes and whatnot. And so I'd be working at pulling that back and creating that positive message and inspiration to everyone to go out and get stuff and take, part of your paycheck and invest that in your future. So you have something to show that increases in value because, you're worth it and you deserve it.
Yeah, I didn't know you were from Chicago. I'm from Cleveland, so we are fellow Midwesterners.
Nice, so, yes.
You understand this part of the world and a lot of the issues that we've been dealing with, here in the Midwest, particularly the industrial Midwest. Obviously,
exactly.
The China stuff has had a very, very negative impact on this.
Big impact, yes.
Right. So before I let you go, talk a little bit about the war on small business.
So I was approached very early in the pandemic by HarperCollins to write an economic take on what was happening. And it sounded really cool. And I knew that, my sort of life would probably going to be disrupted. So like an idiot, I said, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that. Not realizing how complicated that was going to be to follow this mess, this historic mess real time. And I didn't have a point of view going in, although I am a small business advocate. And I knew, from March when the small businesses were the first ones shut down, like, okay, yeah, they're going to bear the brunt of this. But, really what I found in looking at these policies is it was the most historic transfer of wealth we've ever seen in the world, like ever. trillions of dollars that went from Main Street and your average American to Wall Street and the already well connected under the guise of this crisis. And everything was done based on not data and science, but on political clout and connections. So while the book uses small business as sort of an angle to get in, because small business really does represent economic freedom and decentralization, the book in and of itself is about that struggle between central planning and centralized power and the individual and what's happening in our country and what has happened over time. And everything that I've said in that book, even the predictions have all just been, spot on. I've been since March of 2020, I've been unfortunately very spot on with the predictions, and foresaw a lot of these things. And unfortunately, the book had to be cut off at some point and got to market, but it only just slightly alluded to the issues with the disruption in the labor market and the disruption in the supply chain and kind of all these long-term issues that we're now seeing small businesses and average Americans having to deal with, that were set up by bad monetary policy, fiscal policy, and other government policy decisions.
All right, awesome. Let everybody know where they can get the book and to follow you on social media, keep up with what you got going on and all that good stuff.
So you can follow me on social media only if you have a warped sense of humor. I have a viral tweet going around right now, which I have gotten heartache from some lefties from, that was Biden and Lori Lightfoot, who's the mayor of Chicago.
I saw that.
Did you see this? So I said it was good to see Gary Coleman and Mr. Drummond reunited again, which I thought was really funny. Apparently a lot of people thought it was really funny, but I did get a few. Listen, they're destroying my city and my country. Like, don't be butthurt over a joke tweet. I could say much more. But anyway, so if you want great content like that, you can follow me on Twitter at Carol J.S. Roth. And if you have economic questions, you can send them to me on Twitter or shoot them to me via email. My website's at carolroth.com. And then if you'd like to buy the book, I'm always an advocate of being very intentional with your dollars. So if you have the ability to buy it from a local bookstore, or bookshop.org is a great resource. They are an online provider that fulfills from local bookstores. So all different kinds of books that you can buy there. But if you want to give your money to the big guys, like, I'm a capitalist, that's fine too. So wherever fine books are sold, you can see The War on Small Business. And a little secret that I'm working on another project that you might see next year.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show and spending some time with us and dropping all those gems of knowledge. We definitely appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invite. I much appreciate it. And you and your knowledge and your great way of breaking everything down.